The other thing I thought about like a cold open was just like clowning on Vin Diesel for his new song.
Okay, so seriously, there's no reason that it's as good as it is. And I say good because it's not terrible.
Well, okay, here's my thing on it. It's like, would people be making a fuss about it if it was any other person other than Vin Diesel? Because to my ear, I'm not much of a house music guy, but to me it sounds like a basic house music track that has his vocals and lyrics laid in, and people are just kind of getting excited because it's Vin Diesel doing it.
Yeah, of course. Isn't that like how pop music works in general anyway? Like Paris Hilton will come out with a pop song and it's not good, but it'll get like 1 million plays and it's on radio all the time just because it's Paris Hilton. Like if you said it, if you didn't tell me it was Vin Diesel, I would not have known it was Vin Diesel.
Yeah, like I could have seen like, I don't know, Pitbull or some other person.
Definitely sounds a bit like Pitbull. Pitbull is awful, by the way.
It's kind of like, I mean, I just kind of classify it as a novelty song. Like, you know, people are excited. Yeah. But it is, I stand by what I said on Twitter. It's better than Jeremy Renner's music.
Yo, of course. I don't think Jeremy Renner does anything good. Like if you put together his entire film career plus his music career plus his digital app career, I think you come up with a net negative, wouldn't you?
Here's the thing. I will say that Renner has turned in a few good performances in like ensemble movies, but I don't think that I've ever really enjoyed him as the star of anything.
But I think Vin Diesel, I mean, like he's got big muscles and he kind of acts tough, but there's a bit of like dorkiness about him.
Oh, big time. Like look at the movies that he makes when he's not making fast movies.
Well, even as Dom, anytime he says, you know, family forever, family first, you're kind of like laughing on the inside going like, wow, what you're saying is true, but you are so corny. And let's not forget, I am Groot. That's him too, eh? So good job, Vin Diesel. Good job.
I won't listen to your song again, but you know.
No, it's annoying as hell.
But with that, let's get into the show. Welcome back to episode 83 of the Extra Buttery Podcast, a free-flowing conversation between two guys who love movies and TV. This time on the show, we're going to talk a little bit about the Snyder Cut. We've talked about it before, but there's been a few little more tidbits dropped. And then we'll do a bit of catch-up on The Boys. We talked about it last week, but there's been a few more episodes since then, and things are starting to develop. And then we'll dedicate the rest of the episode to film festival talk. We'll be talking about the last few movies that I watched at TIFF, and then we'll jump over into VIFF, the Vancouver International Film Festival, where both of us have been watching some movies and posting our thoughts up on the site, so we'll get into that. But joining me from Vancouver is my co-host, Jason Chen. So this bit that kind of dropped about the Justice League Snyder Cut that's heading to HBO Max, basically, it was just kind of a budget figure because before this little headline hit, people were kind of tossing around ideas about what this big HBO Max production would cost, you know, the reshoots that Zack Snyder allegedly has to do. And the figure is $70 million, apparently, which I think I'd heard beforehand. I'd heard a few months ago, but now it seems to be a little bit more set in stone.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Because I think the original number that they floated was like 30 to 35 million because of all the...
Oh, was it?
Yeah, of all the like sort of CGI and color correcting that they have to do.
Right.
But now they're talking about actual reshoots. So I think Ben Affleck, Ray Fisher, and some of the other characters are actually coming back to redo scenes, or not redo, but actually film new scenes. And I believe the sort of statement that they gave was that everything that Whedon shot would be cut from this new movie. So It would be 100% purely Zack Snyder's vision. And 70 million is not a small number, especially for a film that's not going to get a theatrical release.
True.
Think about how many like documentaries or indie films you can finance with that kind of stuff.
Exactly. I mean, clearly HBO and I guess Warner Brothers more broadly is they're kind of pinning a lot of hopes on this project. They're kind of hoping that it becomes their flagship product, whether still don't know what format it's going to be in, if it's going to be a super long, like 4-hour movie, or if it's going to be a mini series of some sort. But kind of the way, you think back to when Netflix was first getting underway, they had House of Cards. That was their big first exclusive coming out of the gate. And I guess they're really hoping that, whatever this thing is, that they can make back 70 mil and make even a profit, off of new subscribers. Would Ray Fisher come back though? Because it sounds like he's in a big spat right now with Warner Bros.
Yes, but that's because he had issues with Joss Whedon.
Right.
And from all accounts, the cast and crew love Zack Snyder. So I think he's willing to come back, and especially if it gives Cyborg more material, I don't see why not. Because I think he was probably the most underused of the heroes in Justice League.
Yeah, I'd say that's true. I mean, they had a lot of work to do because they were introducing him and giving him this big finale role all in the same movie. And the movie was only 2 hours long, not to mention all the stuff with the heroes we already knew.
Yeah, exactly. And he's supposed to get like a proper introduction. I think we actually saw clips of him becoming Cyborg in the trailer that would eventually cut from the final film.
Right.
The other thing too is like, I think we can both agree like the movie theater industry has irrevocably changed forever.
Yes.
And I wonder if HBO Max is really successful with this big budget superhero flick, if we're going to see more streaming studios like Netflix or Hulu even sort of put more money into like these big budget IPs. Amazon's already doing that with Lord of the Rings, although we have still no idea how that's going to turn out because we know nothing about it yet, I think.
Yeah, they spent allegedly $1 billion, billion with a B, on that one project. And Netflix has made similar, maybe not quite that size, but they've been buying up properties all over the place. They bought the rights to the Narnia franchise, which is the closest kind of thing to Lord of the Rings. Not to mention like there was some talk before Max Landis became persona non grata in Hollywood. They were going to make this sequel to Bright because it had been the most watched thing on Netflix when it came out. that project, if it's not in kind of development hell, it seems to have been totally canceled. No one's talked about it since the announcement that a sequel was in development.
That's a good thing, right? Considering how much you disliked Bright.
Oh, well, it was wretched. I mean, I hope they killed it, but the position that Bright would have had for Netflix in their kind of roster would have been this kind of original, in quotation marks, IP that they developed that they could serialize into a cinematic universe of some sort.
The one drawback I think I can kind of see already is that these superhero films are always much better in theaters. So we talked about in the previous episode how like Tenet couldn't save the summer blockbuster sort of tentpole industry. And I'm afraid that they're going to double down on that and say we're done with blockbusters in the summer in theaters forever. I really dread that day because I still don't think there's a replacement for seeing something in IMAX or like with a 50-foot screen with like blaring speakers, because you're not going to get that in your own home ever.
The one thing I'm confused about, though, with this Snyder Cut situation is how they're going to market it, because the original version that Whedon finished and that came out in theaters had the benefit of a whole bunch of random foot traffic of, average moviegoers who don't pay any attention to any of this industry stuff, who just heard, oh, there's a new movie with Superman and Batman out and Wonder Woman. I'm going to go see that this weekend. And now they're releasing this allegedly completely different version that is supposed to be a whole lot better, but how do they market that to and get the same kind of interest from those average moviegoers who don't care about the changes that have been made? Because any director's cut is going to have a much smaller audience than the original product.
Right. That's a good point, actually. Although my counter to that would be that I think there's a fair amount of people who've seen Justice League already who are more intrigued by this new Snyder Cut, like I am. So if Justice League had turned off some fans off DCEU, I think there's a chance that they can recoup some of the losses with the new Snyder Cut. And I think maybe that can make up for it, because God knows all these nerds are crazy about this Snyder Cut. But the average moviegoer, that's interesting, because I don't know if the average moviegoer would even sign up for HBO Max, because if they already have like other streaming services. So that's an interesting question. But it's not like the box office where we can really see on black on white how much a movie has made.
True.
Gauging how a movie makes money off a stream is kind of different because you're kind of sharing that streaming revenue with a whole bunch of other productions that you've put out. I mean, you'll have metrics, but I mean, if Bright had been released in theaters, I don't imagine it'd be like a really high grossing film.
Yeah, and of course there's with Bright, it's how much of that, highest ever viewership number was just people hate watching it, or people who were tuning in because they'd heard that it was terrible and they wanted to see for themselves. And I don't know how Netflix was kind of like evaluating, did they jump the gun, and when they announced a sequel and said like, oh, we got to do this because the numbers look great, but then did they take a closer look and say like, oh, well, actually of the, millions of people who watched it, more than half of them put the little thumbs down when they finished it,
I'm sure they have metrics for all this kind of stuff, and it wouldn't surprise me if they said that they had greenlit a sequel just to get more people to watch Bright or to sign up for Netflix for that matter. I think the end goal is always to get more subscribers, not necessarily saying that Bright is this crown jewel of a film, because I think you're delusional if you think it is. And I don't think Netflix execs are that stupid. Like, you should know a bad film when you see one.
Yeah. Well, we will talk a little bit more about Mr. Landis's work a little bit later in the show.
Right.
But maybe jumping out of the Snyder Cut discussion into a surprisingly good transition to The Boys, which
surprisingly good. Our transitions are perfect.
Yeah.
Come on.
No, well, and I really mean it this time, because there's actually a not so subtle call out to Joss Whedon and the production of Justice League in one of the recent episodes of The Boys. So for the people who, again, those kind of hardcore nerds who've been following all the headlines and know, what's being referenced. But The Boys is at episode 6 now out of the 8 that they've got planned for this season. And I know we talked the last time about The Boys, how we were sort of wondering where the plot was going. And I don't know, this season as a whole is a much slower burn.
What's going on here? Water's making more soup terrorists?
Get out of here! Episode 6 is, I think, by far the best episode so far, because a lot of stuff happens. Like, characters get moving, the plot gets moving. Mm-hmm. I'm just curious why they waited until episode 6 to show this. I feel like they introduced this too late. I felt like maybe this episode should have been the midway point, episode 4. And then so it gives you plenty of time and breathing room to sort things out and set things up for the next season. Because I think it's an 8 episode season, right?
Yeah.
So there's 2 episodes. And basically, you're definitely going to have one episode that's mostly action, where, the heroes are beating the crap out of each other. And then you have another one where you're setting up the next season. But I wonder if that's enough, considering how big that cast is and how many loose threads that they have hanging.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I mean, plot wise, in episode 5, we kind of got another little bit of an update to what the Deep is up to with the Church of the Collective, this kind of Scientology type thing. They still haven't fully kind of dropped that shoe, but they continued it in episode 6 as well. We learned a little bit more about Stormfront and the fact that she's actually, so spoilers ahead, obviously, skip over this section, or, refer to our little show notes in the episode description if you want to skip past this chunk and go right into our festival talk to come. Yeah, so we learned a little bit more about Storefront and how she used to be known as this hero named Liberty.
What a twist, though. I loved it.
But yeah, they developed that even more in episode 6, and they reveal that what we originally thought the Liberty might be some sort of 1960s era superhero who had this kind of Confederacy or white supremacist angle, but it turns out that she's actually a former Nazi, and she was the recipient of one of the first ever injections of the superhero serum, Compound V, back in the 30s from the guy who founded Vought, and gave her all these powers, and she's been sort of living in semi-secret, kind of changing identities in the decades since. And she's got this vision that she explains to Homelander about building an army of millions of supes who will basically rob out humanity as the, regular humanity and take over and become this race of Supermen, which is, it's starting to take on a little bit of that. You remember how like the Nazis were into occult kind of stuff? And,
oh yeah, totally, like a superior race kind of stuff. It's kind of venturing into X-Men territory.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, where like Homelander is kind of like Magneto, where they believe that they're like a superior race and that the Earth people, I guess the non-compound V people, should be bowing down to them.
Yes.
We had Homelander's kid, and then we had the story about Kenji, which is the female's little brother. Big brother?
Little brother, yeah.
Little brother. And then we have Maeve with the whole like LGBT and then bringing down Homelander sort of subplot. All those three things have been kind of, well, not Maeve, because we kind of mentioned it in episode 6, but those three things have kind of like taken a backseat now, because in episode 6, we discover this Vought facility where they're breeding super terrorists.
Yes.
And now we've got Huey, who is, I think, maybe in a certain sense, mortally wounded and unable to leave the bed. And Starlight has officially defected from the Seven.
Or yeah, I think the Seven hasn't come after her yet, but yeah, she's ripped out her little tracking beacon, and she's pretty convinced that the next time
there's no way she's gonna go back to the Seven.
Yeah, the next time she sees them, they're probably gonna kick her out
or kill her
or try to kill her. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, the Maeve story and some of the other kind of B plots have definitely taken a bit of a backseat. We have a bit more of an A story now, where the boys are trying to chase down this mystery surrounding Stormfront. They found the facility where Lamplighter, who's a former member of the Seven, played by Shawn Ashmore, has been kind of administering the Compound V and trying to do research and stabilize these injections to create this army. And we get a lot of backstory for Frenchie in episode 6 as well, where
that's right.
It goes into this fateful night where he abandoned his post temporarily to tend to a friend who was overdosing, and that was that crucial window that allowed Lamplighter to go off and try to kill Mallory, who is their CIA handler. But it turns out that he thought Mallory was going to be in this house, but it was Mallory's grandchildren. So he torched Mallory's grandchildren.
Right.
So we get this kind of like big crescendo of emotion, lots of secret histories being revealed in this episode. So yeah, I mean, on that score, it delivered a lot of emotion, a lot of plot. It definitely, like, I agree with you. It was one of the best in the season so far.
Yeah. And the whole A-Train thing being sort of lured by the deep into the collective, I thought that was really interesting. But then again, did we really need 6 episodes to do that? And going back to like sort of the Deep's initiation into the collective, I felt that, okay, yeah, it was kind of funny, but it also dragged a little bit.
Yeah.
And maybe we're wired this way because season 1 moved fast. I think every episode in season 1, there was some sort of twist or major development. Season 2 is really taking its time. And I think with Huey actually being mortally injured actually furthers my theory that they're going to inject him with some Compound V if they get their hands on it.
There'll be like, a last minute complication. Like when we leave him at the end of episode 6, the doctors have said that he's going to be okay, but he has to stay there for a few days. But maybe there'll be some other development that kind of forces Starlight. Where Starlight would get the Compound V, I don't know. I'm sure they'll.
Doesn't she still have that little vial in her little purse?
Oh, maybe she does. Yeah, I can't remember.
Yeah. See, like, there's too many loose threads, that things that they should just kind of leave.
Yeah.
and then don't come back to at all, or just kind of hint towards here and there.
Lots of great comedy in this these past 2 episodes too, like the like I was saying, like the dig at Joss Whedon, how A-Train wants to change the script, and the director of this Avengers style team up movie just totally blows him off, which is almost exactly what happened to Ray Fisher on the set of Justice League.
Can we also like talk about how Homelander and Stormfront are like perfect for each other?
Yes.
Both Anthony Starr and Aya Cash have this like intimidation factor to it, but they're also kind of like funny and humorous about it.
Yeah.
And it just feels like they are definitely, I think, the best couple in the show.
Yeah, except you still see Homelander's like psychotic man-child tendencies coming out.
Oh, and she plays them perfectly though, right?
When Stormfront even flies away for 20 minutes, it just causes Homelander to have a total freak out like a child and, carry on as if she's never coming back. And, of course, that dynamic is probably going to get more and more explosive as the next 2 episodes unfold.
I just want to quickly, before we move on. So the next 2 episodes, episode 7 is called Butcher, Baker, Candlestick Maker.
Okay.
So I don't know what you think of Baker, but Butcher is, I think, Butcher, obviously, or Carl Urban's character. Candlestick Maker has to be lamplighter, right?
Yeah.
So who's Baker? And I wonder what it means. And then the last episode is called What I Know. So What I Know is going to be some sort of like information bombshell that changes the whole landscape of the 7 and the show. Like something has to be revealed either to the characters or to the audience. Or to like the general public in the show, where public sentiment about the 7 really changes. It's really interesting though because of the political backdrop that we're in, and how the show is going to address it, if it ever does at all.
They got a little bit close to that with Stormfront in the earlier part of the season, when it was kind of suggested that she's kind of building up this Trump style white supremacist kind of social media following.
Yeah, this right-wing sort of really divided public, manipulating public sentiment and opinion with social media and all that stuff. Yeah. It's very, very much like today, which is a little scary, but also really interesting to watch.
Yeah, but it doesn't feel too hit you over the head. The writers are doing a good job kind of making it feel like it makes sense in the universe.
And I think they're kind of avoiding it too without addressing it directly. I think because they don't want the political commentary to take away from the show at its heart, which is not a lighthearted version of comic book heroes, but like a very bloody, gory, funny, comedic black comedy kind of feel to it. You can't lose that humor.
No, exactly. And if you start to feel it sound a little bit too political or too current affairs-y, then, it'll definitely distract from what the show really is. So yeah.
Right.
But coming out of The Boys, still a bit of a Toronto theme because The Boys is produced here in Toronto. I saw a few more movies at TIFF since the last time we talked, and I'll just go into, I guess, 2 of them because one of them was just a Werner Herzog documentary. So
okay,
nerdy stuff for me, but maybe not for the rest of the audience. But the first one I wanted to talk about, as I alluded to a little bit earlier, was a new film based on a script written by Max Landis. Mm-hmm. And if I sound a little bit disappointed to be talking about him, it's with good reason. I actually bought a ticket for this movie. It's called Shadow in the Cloud, not knowing that Landis was attached to it at all. I only discovered it like the night before I went to screen the movie, that he shares a co-writing credit with a New Zealand filmmaker named Roseanne Liang. And it's a bit confusing because you see his name and Roseanne Liang's on the same title card at the end of the movie. But then when you check IMDb, it just has a writing credit for her, the writer-director.
Okay.
So I'm not sure what's going on there. Like, did Landis write a early draft and then it was heavily changed later on, or what's going on? But the problem with his involvement is, and for people who are listening who have no idea what I'm getting into here, Max Landis had built up a bit of goodwill for himself. And a couple of years ago, he made a movie called Chronicle, which was kind of, again, taking apart the superhero genre and kind of commenting on it. And he made a short film called The Death and Return of Superman, another like video essay kind of commenting on comic book culture, and built up a bit of nerd cred. And, he felt like he was the kind of the cutting edge in Hollywood. He was selling all these scripts to all sorts of studios. But then it turns out that he had at least 8 women come forward and allege sexual harassment, emotional harassment against them by him. And he has, deservedly so, faded from the spotlight a little bit. I have a feeling he's still kind of lurking around Hollywood, writing spec scripts and getting, rewrite worked and that kind of thing. So he's not been fully nixed. That's a shame because he had this project called Shadow in the Cloud that has since gone on to be made by a female filmmaker from New Zealand, starring Chloe Grace Moretz in this World War II creature feature, which has a lot of great things going for it, but as soon as you know that Landis is involved and then he co-wrote the script, you can't help but see his fingerprints all over the thing. And so the story of the movie is Chloe Grace Moretz plays a World War II women's auxiliary pilot who finds herself on this airstrip in New Zealand late one night, and she's got this mysterious satchel with her, and this set of orders printed out from a colonel saying that she has to be transported super high priority, top secret, no questions asked by the bomber that she climbs aboard on this runway. And as soon as she gets aboard, she finds that it's totally crewed by loads of misogynistic airmen who want nothing to do with her, think she's a spy, and they decide to lock her up in the gun turret on the belly of the plane. And they say, oh, you have to stay down there for the whole flight. Don't even come up here. You're not welcome. Mm-hmm. And then as soon as she's down there, she continues most of the dialogue for probably like a solid half of the movie. It's a 90-minute movie over the radio. And it's just Chloe Grace Moretz in this gun turret. And she has to kind of sell this whole movie. And the whole time the men are coming over the radio. They want to open the satchel. They don't believe that she actually has these top secret orders. And then in the midst of all of this arguing back and forth, she sees a gremlin out in the body of the plane, and it's starting to tear the plane apart midair. And of course, none of the men in the main part of the plane believe her, and she's trying to, assert herself and make herself heard. And the tension builds and builds and builds until finally they have to take her word for it. And then, she has to join the fight to save the plane. So it's not a bad premise. And it's got a lot of, they do a lot with a very limited budget. The weird part is like once it becomes an action movie and once Chloe Grace Moretz's character kind of rejoins the rest of the crew, the movie has this kind of weird tone to it where it's like, I don't know when Landis wrote the script, but it almost feels like he was aware of all of the criticisms against him, all of the allegations, and he tried to make a movie where he was kind of putting this female character on a pedestal and showing how powerful women can be. And it just feels icky. And I don't know whether I would feel that way if I didn't know that he was involved.
Wait, it feels icky because they put Chloe Grace Moretz's character on a pedestal? Is that what you're saying?
Well, yeah, because it feels like he's doing it very cynically because he wants to be seen.
Oh, I see.
Because he wants to be seen as supporting women, whereas if he hadn't had his hand forced by the allegations against him, he would have just made.
I see. So it feels kind of like an insincere female empowerment kind of thing.
Yes. And it's a shame because, a lot of the people here are doing great work. The Chloe Grace Moretz has to anchor the movie for this huge chunk where she's the only person on screen. And, the Roseanne Liang is a up and coming female filmmaker. So you want to support that. But I'm sort of crossing my fingers and hoping that they did a lot of work afterwards to kind of remold Landis's script and maybe, take out more objectionable stuff. Because it just builds to this point where at the end, they manage, spoilers ahead, obviously, they manage to crash land the plane and deal with the gremlin. And you get this bit where for no explainable reason, Chloe Grace Moretz becomes like a hand-to-hand combat expert and is fighting the gremlin. And then she deals with the gremlin. And then it's revealed that she's, the thing in the satchel is actually her baby born out of wedlock.
Oh, what?
Yeah. And she goes to breastfeed the baby as in the triumphant final shot of the movie. She's there breastfeeding the baby after ripping this gremlin apart with her bare hands. So you're like, what is going on here? On one hand, it's yeah, go women. And on the other hand, it's what did the screenwriter, what was his ulterior motive,
Uh-huh. Okay. Fair enough. It feels like one of those movies that because it's gone through so many revisions and different ideas, it doesn't quite know what it wants to be. But when you're pressed against the deadline for release, you kind of have to cobble it together and hope it just kind of works.
Yeah. So, it picked up distribution. I think Vertical is the distribution company.
Okay.
And Redbox. So, I think it'll be available in the kind of the Redbox vending machines that you see in some stores. And I guess they have a streaming solution as well.
Right.
If you're looking for a creature feature, it's set in World War II. It's actually pretty decent. But look at it kind of critically, I guess is what I'm saying, and kind of try to figure out, where you stand when it comes to Landis's involvement.
Right. Okay. Fair.
Yeah. And then the other movie I was going to talk about from TIFF is, well, really quick, it's an Idris Elba starring film called Concrete Cowboy. Which was part of the gala presentations, like the kind of highest tier of the TIFF selections this year. And it's a modern day drama about, it's actually Caleb McLaughlin, I think his name is, from Stranger Things. He's the, I forget the character he plays. He's one of the foursome of boys who are the kind of the main characters on Stranger Things. And he plays a young man who's in high school in Chicago. And he's kind of in that phase where he's starting to like pick fights at school. He's not fitting in. He's not interested in academics or anything like that. And his mom is out of options. So she decides to pack him into the car and ship him off to Philadelphia, where his father lives. His father is played by Idris Elba. And it turns out that his father is actually a modern day cowboy and a guy who is a proponent of this. I'd heard of this before, but there are these urban cowboys in certain big cities in the U.S. who keep horses and ride horses in like downtown urban areas, big cities. And it's become, these stables have kind of become places for people who are kind of, especially like African-American people who, maybe they're kind of like disadvantaged, or they've been, kicked down by life or whatever. They're able to find a purpose in them, and they're able to find a sense of like responsibility for these animals and caring for these animals. And it becomes a community for them, and it allows them to kind of stop them from, spiraling into, selling drugs or crime or things like that. And so this is just a kind of like a tight little story about how the young man at the center of it, he was probably destined for a life of crime, but then through joining up with this stable run by his father, who he doesn't have a great relationship with, he's able to kind of, find a better life, find a new purpose that will keep him keep his nose clean. It's not a particularly innovative kind of movie. I feel like a lot of the dramatic beats, it's kind of a classic father-son dynamic where the father's been absent for a while and they have to kind of rekindle their relationship. A lot of the dramatic beats will feel very, very familiar, but you have this setting that people probably aren't familiar with these urban cowboys and the kind of the things that go into raising a horse in the middle of a big city. And it's the kind of thing that you could very easily queue up on Netflix some night if you're just looking for a straightforward kind of drama movie. Not too controversial, not nothing that's going to win many awards or anything like that, but it'll entertain you for 2 hours.
I find that's definitely sort of the feeling you get from a lot of festival films is that you're not. It's rare that you really see anything that really blows your socks off. I think whenever you get like a Moonlight or a Shoplifters or Burning, it's kind of the exception rather than the rule.
Sure.
What you're finding mostly is movies that you otherwise would not be able to see or have even heard of. And generally speaking, they're all quite well done. So it's I think a good time. It's a festival where you can just go in to any film if you can get it. And for 2 hours, you'll be, pleasantly entertained. I think a lot of people get this feeling that, film festival entry, con or whatever. The reality is that only a select few movies rise to the top because these film festivals, there are literally hundreds of films.
Yeah.
And the vast majority of them are good. But there's also quite a few, I think, that are really bad.
Yes. I mean, well, we talked last year about some of the stuff I saw at TIFF, and, there's always a handful of stinkers. And, you were mentioning in one of your recent VIFF reviews that there's a bit of a roll of the dice when you buy tickets at film festivals because, or even if you're like us and you get a chance at some press screeners, oftentimes all you have to go on with one of these movies is the synopsis that was written by the distributor or the production company, and the fact that so-and-so was the director, so-and-so wrote it, and so-and-so is in the cast.
Right, that's right, exactly. Actually, that's a good segue. So shall we move on to VIFF then?
Yeah, sure. So how many have you seen so far? VIFF has been running for the past like 3 or 4 days.
Yeah, so I've seen 4.
Okay.
Next week I'll be going to 2 live viewings because the 2 films I'm going to won't have online screeners. It's just past the first weekend. It's been a little weird. Obviously not going out kind of dulls the excitement a little bit.
Sure.
Well, for one thing, I don't miss the lines at all, but it was always kind of interesting to see the lineups that form and see what people are lining up for. So there's a bit of a detachment there in the experience, but I do like the format better because you can watch films on your own time. You can watch them from the comfort of your own home. And more often than not, these movies aren't really CGI heavy or special effects heavy. So watching them on a screen at home is okay. I don't know if you got that feeling as well, though, with TIFF or your VIFF screening yet.
Yeah, because like they did a similar method where I ended up seeing a total of 7 movies, but only 1 was an in-person screening. And yeah, like the freedom of like turning it on whenever you want to. Admittedly, you have to do it within at least with the TIFF screenings, it was within a 24-hour period of the movie becoming available.
Okay, interesting.
So they locked it down a little bit to kind of combat piracy a bit.
Right.
But yeah, you can, these digital platforms that the festivals have built are pretty compatible with most streaming devices and computer setups and things like that. So it's not hard to kind of get into the portal and queue something up.
Right. Okay. So the first film I saw at VIFF is a Japanese film that's called A Life Turned Upside Down. My Dad's an Alcoholic.
Right.
A bit of a long title, but it's based on a webcomic with a similar title. It's not literally that in Japanese, but you basically get the gist of it. It is told from the view of Saki, who we meet in the film as an 8-year-old and then grows into a teenager and a young adult, 30 years old. And it's a story about how her father's alcoholism basically destroys her family. This is I think it's a very interesting film because it depicts so much of Japanese culture that we're familiar with, but does so in a way that's not exaggerated. In Japanese culture, there's a lot of things that are left unsaid. It's very much a patriarchal sort of family society. And so Saki's father is one of those Japanese salaryman. So goes to work during the day, doesn't leave before the boss does a lot of heavy social drinking because it's expected of him because he believes that leads to good business. So he's trying to provide for his family. But in the meantime, he stumbles home drunk all the time. He passes out in the foyer all the time. And it puts a lot of burden on his mom, which ends up leading to like a very tragic consequence. Saki and her little sister Fumi end up growing up in basically a home where they start to resent their dad a little bit, but because of tragic certain circumstances, they lose their mom and they're forced to grow up in a household. And the toll it brings on them is basically psychological. So Saki becomes this really insecure girl, not a whole lot of confidence, was really embarrassed by her dad. And the only way sort of she gets out from this sort of sadness is by drawing a webcomic. So it's very semi-autobiographical in that sense. And what I love about it is that even though it's a pretty sad story, there are definitely hints of humor mixed in. So because it's a webcomic, they sort of mix like manga elements into it. So
that's what I was confused by because I haven't watched the trailer for it yet, but some of the stills that VIFF shared for us to use when we posted up your review were very colorful, very saturated. They had the look of a comedy, but the description of the movie sounds like a huge downer. So there seems to be like this real clash between the subject matter of the movie and how the movie is shot and presented.
Right. Yeah. And they definitely use a bit of humor to explain it. It's very emotional because there's certain scenes that are just, I think, tough to watch because it does deal with people dying and sort of all the troubles that come with it. But whenever Saki sort of delves into her little like isolation bubble, these little thought bubbles kind of pop up and it tells her what she's thinking without outright showing the actions or showing what those actions do to the other people in the movie. I thought that was a really good way to convey what she's saying, to make it at least tight, because I think sometimes with these films, you run the risk of making it too long. Like we know that because this story takes place over a long period of time, sometimes it ends up being a bit of a slow burn, but I don't think this film is a slow burn at all, which is nice. I like it when film festival films are nice and short and tight. I can only sit through like a Terrence Malick thing for so long.
Yes, yeah.
So I think it's super well acted. I love the performances in it. I think it's, of the 4 films I've seen so far, I think this is by far, well, not maybe by far, but definitely the best one. So if you have a chance, I highly recommend it. A Life Turned Upside Down. My Dad's an Alcoholic. That's what it's called.
Cool. All right. Well, I'll talk about the one that I've seen so far. It's called The Reason I Jump. And there's also a Japanese connection to this one. This is a documentary by Jerry Rothwell, I think his name is. And it's all about nonverbal autism. And these are folks who, for people who haven't met people who suffer with this particular form of autism, these are people who are born and they have no capability of like normal speech. And oftentimes it comes with like behavior problems, and these people can be susceptible to raging kind of outbursts and crises and this kind of thing. And it's a real, like, it can be a real burden for the people who are diagnosed with it. But back in 2007, a young Japanese man who was 13 at the time wrote a book about this experience. He himself has nonverbal autism. He can't speak. He can't have a conversation with you in a traditional way, but he actually wrote a book about his experience and tried to kind of cast some light on what it was like to live with this situation. Basically, by his main way of having a conversation with somebody would be to spell out words individually, letter by letter, by pointing at letters on a grid. And, so at the time this book came out, it was a huge kind of development because nobody living with this condition had been able to do something like this before. Fast forward a few years later, the book was translated into English and now has become the basis for this documentary, where the filmmaker takes portions of the translated narration and gets an actor to voice them. And then he conducts interviews with 5 different people living around the world who have forms of nonverbal autism, and kind of talking about, using the narration from the book to cast some light on their stories and sort of show how they are living with this situation, and also using the editing of the documentary, specifically the sound design and the visuals, to really plunge you, like just totally immerse you into the closest that a movie can kind of get to what it would be like to have this kind of thing, especially like the way that people with autism can zone in on specific details. They can become obsessed with sounds and things. So the soundtrack of the movie just gets totally taken over by these like thunderous kind of sounds that are, it's like, having things held right up to your ear basically. And it's quite something. It really kind of, I said in the review that I posted on the site, it's a classic example of that Roger Ebert quote that I always go back to, of movies being machines that generate empathy. Because you watch this movie and even if like it's probably impossible for a movie to accurately depict what it's like to like fully 100% accurately depict what it's like, but this comes, I would say, like the closest of any movie I've seen. So you really, you come away from it being like, wow, okay, I know a little bit more about what these people are dealing with and what the challenge of day-to-day life, which is quite something.
Mm-hmm. That's a good segue, actually. Speaking of challenge of day-to-day life, the second film I saw at VIFF is a Hong Kong film called My Prince Edward.
Oh, yeah. The review for this just went up, actually.
Oh, perfect. So if you haven't checked it out, go to kinetoscope.ca. My Prince Edward, it's a bit of a double entendre. The movie is about a couple, Fong and Edward, and they've been in a long-term relationship, and they are moving into the next stage of their life, which is marriage. They live in this area of Hong Kong called Prince Edward, which is this, I guess, sort of neighborhood, and they work at a mall together. She works in a bridal gown rental shop, and he's a wedding photographer. And so the whole movie revolves on them trying to, move on to the next part of their lives. The complication comes when Fong reveals that she had earlier been in a sham marriage 10 years before with a mainland Chinese guy who she's never met. And it's because she needed money to move out of her home. She had a falling out with her parents. And so she had a marriage on paper to get some money and move out. The problem is that, one, Edward doesn't know. And two, in Hong Kong, there's a big stigma, especially in Asia in general, actually. There's a big stigma against divorcees. It's kind of like a shame if you've been married and divorced and you're marrying again. It actually says on your marriage certificate if you're a divorcee or not.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, which is something I did not know at all. But according to my mom, I guess it's real. But anyway, so the story revolves around her basically trying to move on. So she tries to track down the mainline guy she married, tries to get a divorce from him. In the meantime, really questions why she wants to marry Edward in the first place, whether it's because they've been together for a long time, whether it's because that's what people around her are just doing, or because if it's something that she really wants. I think we've seen these kind of movies before about, people getting cold feet or people marrying for the wrong reasons. What elevates this material are definitely the performances, especially Edward, who I think really comes off as the sweet dude, but also has a bit of like a gaslighting sort of side to him. He's a bit clingy, but I think he represents a lot of guys who maybe don't have the best prospects and have hinged their lives on this one girlfriend that they really, really love. She obviously wants more freedom. And so there's a bit of like a interplay in it, and it's set in Hong Kong. I think that's really fitting because they live in this like really cramped apartment. So they're forced to sort of confront each other every day. There's no running from the problem.
Right.
And so it's sort of a microcosm of sort of like the claustrophobia I think people feel about when they're in a long-term relationship and they don't know what to do next. I think we're at that age, like in our, late 20s, 30s, where a lot of people are thinking about it or have done it, get married and all that stuff. So I think it's actually kind of like I can relate to something like this. It's a very solid film. It's not as good as My Dad's an Alcoholic, but this movie or Edward, the guy who plays Edward, Chu Park Hong, has actually been nominated in Asia for a Best Actor. So if no reason to just watch these people go through these steps, I think I'd highly recommend it as well.
So then the title, My Prince Edward, it's a double meaning because it's referring to the to the neighborhood that this takes place in, but it's also like she's reflecting on whether Edward, her husband, is actually her prince, I suppose.
Yeah, basically, yeah. The literal Chinese title isn't My Prince Edward. It refers to the building that they live in, but it's one of those rare cases where I thought like the English title is somehow more clever than the original title.
Oh,
but I just thought it was interesting. The third movie I saw was called Yalda, A Night for Forgiveness. This is a French production, but the movie takes place in Iran, and it's about this girl Miriam who is accused of killing her husband. Her husband is much older than her, like old enough to be her grandfather type. And she comes from sort of like a lower caste, a lower socioeconomic status. And she claims that she accidentally killed him because she had pushed him and he fell. And in this sort of state of fear, she kind of ran away and left him to die. And so what happens is she's asked to come on this TV show during Yalda, which is, from my understanding, a big Iranian holiday, and to face Mona. Mona is the grown daughter of the husband that Miriam had just killed. And so in Sharia law, Mona has the ability to commute the death sentence of Miriam. It's a very much eye for an eye type of legal system.
Right.
So because Miriam killed her husband, Miriam not deserves to die, but is going to be executed somehow. And so Miriam tries on live TV, tries to plead her case with Mona. And if Mona forgives her, Miriam is sent to prison rather than being executed.
Oh.
It's a very interesting dynamic.
It's not based on a true story or anything, is it?
It's not based on a true story, but the movie does say that it is based on true events. So it does take a lot of inspiration from what I understand are stuff that's happened before.
Right.
So what you get is Miriam, who is this really young woman who is very, I think, still emotionally raw and inexperienced, versus Mona, who is this grown woman who's sharp, who's cold, who's calculating. And you kind of pit these two people against each other. And I think that's a very interesting dynamic. But the problem is, I think the director kind of felt insecure about this and felt he needed to throw in a couple wrenches into the story. So we get this plot twist about a baby, and I don't want to spoil it too much. We get a plot twist about sort of Mona's other business adventures, but I don't think it really adds a lot to the film. I think what's most compelling about the film is this conflict between the young and the old, the immature and the mature, within a context of the Sharia law that is very much, I think, biased against women. And so, yeah, so you kind of feel like Mona should have a little more sympathy for Miriam, but she doesn't, because there's a lot of pride and frankly money at stake. So it's a tight film. There are certainly tense moments, especially when they're facing off against each other. But by the second half of the film really falters a bit, because I think it feels insecure. Like, it feels like the conflict that they had set already isn't enough to capture the audience's attention.
Right.
So this was an okay film. I think it's interesting to at least learn about Iranian culture, which I am admittedly not familiar at all with. For the most part, very well acted. Certain plot threads are left hanging, so it could have been better than it should have. I think.
Okay. And then you had one more. It's a movie with an incredibly long title.
Yes. So you mentioned this earlier about how like we have to pick movies based on the title sometimes. This is that movie. So directed by Ted Stenson, a Canadian film, takes place in Calgary. The movie is called Events Transpiring Before, During, and After a High School Basketball Game.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard long titles at film festivals before. This is definitely up there.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, this kind of piques your curiosity, right?
Of course, yeah, because you have to determine, like, you know, what is the movie going to do that's going to justify being this kind of lengthy title.
Exactly. And you kind of feel the sort of tone already, like it's going to be idiosyncratic.
Yeah.
It's going to be sort of quirky and odd because that's what the title is. A high school basketball game is usually something that no one really cares about. So there must be some sort of, you know, really like not cataclysmic, but definitely the big event that happens that changes lives, you know, because otherwise, why would you have this title?
Yeah. Well, we had a movie recently about a high school basketball game where it was the kind of the starting point of the movie, but it had nothing to do with the plot. And that was Vast of Night from a few months ago.
Yes. So again, that's a really actually great point, because I feel like Vast of Night is it's definitely the better film.
Okay.
This title definitely describes Vast of Night in a sort of like roundabout way. Because Vast of Night is about events before, during, and after a high school basketball game. But anyway, so the story follows Middleview High School, and they have this terrible high school boys basketball team coached by an older coach who I think has a lot of detachment, probably because he's been there too long. And he's got this assistant coach who's really overzealous. And it's a very interesting sort of chemistry that they have between them because they're so different. The problem is that from beginning till end, with all the characters we meet, the two coaches, the basketball team, the two refs that ref the game, this sort of mini high school theater troupe that's planning and rehearsing a play in the other gym. Nothing in this film really happens that really changes any of these characters. Oh. And so I left really disappointed because you hype up this event in your title. And I get that maybe this is a slice of life film, but it fails to live up to that title and live up to that idea you're trying to convey, I think.
Yeah, because a title like that definitely has a bit of like an art house kind of vibe to it.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, you would never make a movie like that and just plonk it in a random Cineplex or multiplex.
And because in the title, it clearly lists out a beginning, middle, and end, you feel like there should be some sort of journey, some sort of change. But I never got that from any of the characters. The refs, okay, they start out, on friendly terms and they hate each other. Okay, all right. Well, that's not very interesting. The high school boys team, they start talking about the Matrix at the beginning of the film. They end up talking about the Matrix at the end of the film. And you can only take high school boys talking about, philosophical things for so long, before you're like, please just shut up. You guys don't know anything.
Right.
Even the coaches, I think, the two coaches already had some sort of respect for each other, and they end up with the film with the same amount of respect, I'd say, if not marginally better. It's a short film. It's about 74 minutes, which is really short actually, but it feels so long. It feels like it's just dragged out. The one sort of redeeming point is the theater troupe with 4 kids, and they because their version of King Lear is deemed too controversial. The leader of the troupe, Danica, she starts this like sort of campaign, as a lot of overzealous high school kids would do, and they come up with these weird plans. But there's funny points in between, but it never reaches this climax that you want. There's no turning point, really. There's a bit of Napoleon Dynamite in there where like the funny comes from the awkward.
Right.
At the same time, I haven't seen Napoleon Dynamite in forever, but there's no real sort of plot or importance to any of the things that the characters do. And
I haven't seen this one yet, but to me, it sort of sounds like all of the vignettes or the segments that you would see around the A plot of something like Rushmore or Booksmart or some other, some other movie that had a central character who was going on more of an arc. And then occasionally you would check in on these other smaller stories that were happening around it.
Well, you can skip this for sure entirely. Don't waste your time. I just like that it's CanCon. But I wrote in my review, it feels like a bunch of like mediocre SNL skits kind of cobbled together.
Right.
Because it takes place in the same sort of setting and same building. It becomes sort of a movie. But it never quite comes together, and it's altogether a little forgettable. This is Ted Stenson's directorial debut, and I can definitely see the potential, but it definitely doesn't live up to it.
The time we're recording this, there's still at least another 10 days, I think, left to VIFF. So there's still a lot of movies left to see. And I'll be watching a few more. You'll be watching more, though. Of course, we'll be posting a lot of reviews on the website during that time. So it doesn't sound like there's a real kind of crowning gem for you just yet, other than My Dad's an Alcoholic.
Yeah, not yet. So My Dad's an Alcoholic, I gave it 4 out of 5 on Letterboxd. Yalda and My Prince Edward got 3.5, and The Basketball Game, I don't even want to say the full title because it's just annoying as hell. I gave that a 2, 2.5 because maybe if I'm feeling generous, but definitely some of the more prestige films will come later. So that includes Falling, which is getting a lot of buzz lately. I couldn't get a screening for The Father. That's in high demand. That's the Anthony Hopkins, Olivia Colman drama.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And then Another Round, which is Thomas Vinterberg, I believe.
Yes. Yeah. I've seen like 3 or 4 of his movies now, but he's been bringing this one to various festivals this season.
Yeah. So I still think we're still in the early stages yet. I don't expect anything that'll blow my socks off because that hasn't been the sort of like buzz that has been around this year's festival. Because last year, remember, there was like a few films where even before I had, looked up the movies, there was like a lot of buzz around 2 or 3 of them. This year, not so much. And I kind of enjoy that, actually. I kind of don't like it when one film takes center stage above everything else.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, because TIFF can be the same way, where the People's Choice winner will kind of suck a lot of oxygen out. And there'll, of course, be other movies that end up, popping up at the Oscars, for example. But okay, cool. Well, we will check back in on VIFF in the next episode, and we'll have wrapped up by then. But we'll have seen a few more things, so we'll have another segment on that in the next episode. But until then, head on over to the website, because we have reviews of everything that we've just talked about up there if you want to read a little bit more in detail on any of those things. And we will probably be finishing up doing a final take on The Boys as well, which we talked about in this episode once that season is done. That won't be for a few weeks, but keep your eyes open for that. In the meantime, if you're liking this podcast, consider subscribing, of course, but also, giving us a rating, because that helps us kind of...
5 stars only.
Yeah. If you give us 4 stars, we'll come for you. But yeah, give us a rating on whatever your podcast app of choice is, because that helps the show pop up higher on searches and stuff, wherever they're going to look for podcasts. So we always appreciate that. But until the next episode, my name is Robert Snow in Toronto.
And my name is Jason Chen in Vancouver. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.